The house felt suffocating, as if every wall had been drawn in just a little tighter. Inch by inch, until there was hardly room to breathe. I'd been walking through it like a ghost, going from room to room, not really living. Not really existing. My father was often absent, both physically and emotionally. As if he had slowly distanced himself from everything he had once built with my mother. And then she arrived. She slid into our lives so seamlessly, with her polished smile and carefully crafted charm. At first, it wasn't so bad. I told myself that maybe this was just a phase. That my father would snap out of it, that he was just lonely. But over time, I couldn't ignore it anymore. The way she slowly took over our lives. Carving out a space for herself in every corner of our home. The way she replaced my mother's memory in little ways that stung when I wasn't looking. The pictures on the wall, the furniture. Even the little rituals that used to belong to us, she had found a way to make everything hers. And then came that night, the night that broke everything I had been clinging to. I had come home late from work, the air cool and crisp as I stepped inside. The lights were dim, casting shadows across the living room, and there, sitting by the fireplace, was her. Alone. The shadows in the room seemed to reach out toward her, as though they were drawn to her. Just as I had been, in some strange, twisted way. "Late night?" she asked, not looking up from the glass in her hand. The clink of ice against glass was the only sound in the otherwise still room. I didn't answer right away. I just stood there, staring at her. Her silhouette framed by the firelight. I couldn't quite shake the feeling that she was always watching. Always waiting for me to make a mistake, to show weakness. The house wasn't big enough for both of us anymore. I could feel her shadow stretch over everything, over the memories, over my father. And even over me. "Do you ever think about how things used to be?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, almost too quiet to hear. She glanced at me then, her eyes sharp and calculating. "Of course I do," she said, her tone sweet but cold. "But I don't live in the past, Hazel. I live in the present. And the present, well, the present is exactly where I need it to be." The words hit me harder than I had expected. It wasn't the first time she had made it clear that I was the one who didn't belong here anymore, but something in her tone, the way she said it, as if she had already won, made something inside me snap. "You're wrong," I said, stepping forward, the anger bubbling up in my chest, burning through the hurt I had been hiding for so long. "You've replaced everything. You've replaced her, you've replaced me. And you've made this house your own little kingdom. But I'm still here. I'm still part of this. And I won't let you erase me." Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she took a slow sip from her glass, her gaze not leaving mine. The ice inside clinked again, mocking me. "Do you really think you have a place here anymore?" she asked, her voice a little too smooth, too controlled. "This house can't hold two shadows, Hazel. You've been a shadow for far too long. And it's time for you to go." It was as if the words had been laced with poison, but I didn't let them take root. I didn't let her see the way they made my stomach twist. Or the way my heart clenched in my chest. Instead, I stood tall, my hands trembling slightly at my sides. "You think you've won, don't you?" I said, my voice shaking with the force of everything I had been holding back. "You think you've taken everything, that you've pushed me out. But the thing you don't understand, Ivy, is that you can't take my memories. And you can't take my place. You're just a visitor in my life." She smiled then, a slow, wicked smile that seemed to stretch wider with every passing second. She finally set the glass down on the table, the sound of it landing sharply against the surface. Memories are just that, Hazel. Memories. And as for place, well, it's not about who was here first. It's about who is willing to stay and make it their own. And I'm the one who's staying. Her words were cold, but her gaze, oh, her gaze, it felt like a challenge. Like she was daring me to try to prove her wrong. I wanted to scream at her, to throw every word of frustration I had ever kept hidden at her. To tear down the walls she had built so carefully around my father, around me. But in the end, I did nothing. I just stood there. My chest rising and falling with each breath, trying to hold on to my last shred of dignity. I'm not going anywhere, I said finally, turning away from her, my voice low but firm. You can try to take this house, but you'll never take me. As I walked away from the living room, I felt her eyes on my back. Like the weight of them would follow me down the hall and into the room I had once called my own. But something had changed. The shadow she cast over the house was no longer enough to keep me in the dark. It wasn't about proving anything to her anymore. It was about proving to myself that I could still stand in this place. That I could still find a way to belong, even if it meant fighting for it. And I wasn't going to lose. Not this time. I spent the next few days in a daze, a kind of numbness wrapping around me, keeping me from fully feeling the weight of everything. It was easier that way, to just float through the motions of my life, avoiding the house. Avoiding her, avoiding the questions that kept circling my mind. But eventually, the anger and hurt that had been simmering inside me began to demand attention. It was like a fire that refused to be ignored any longer. One evening, after spending hours staring blankly at my computer screen, I decided to go for a walk. The streets were quiet. The kind of quiet that made everything feel still. As though the world was waiting for something to happen. And in a way, I was too. Waiting. But I wasn't sure for what anymore. Waiting for an apology that would never come? Waiting for my father to finally see through her? I couldn't keep doing that. I couldn't keep waiting for things that weren't going to happen. I had spent far too long giving her power over me, letting her dictate the terms of my life. And I wasn't going to stand for it anymore. I found myself walking back toward the house, though I hadn't planned to. I stood across the street from it, watching as the lights flickered in the windows, casting shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. She was in there, I knew it. The house didn't feel like mine anymore. It hadn't for a long time. But tonight, I wasn't just going to leave and run. Tonight, I was going to confront her. The decision felt right, but the closer I got to the front door, the more the weight of everything pressed down on me. The fear, the uncertainty, the shame. But I knocked anyway. 3 sharp raps on the door that echoed louder than I expected. It was a moment before I heard footsteps inside. The door creaked open, and there she was. She looked the same, that practiced calm in her posture, that knowing smile. As if nothing was ever truly wrong. But tonight, it felt different. I wasn't the same girl I had been when I left. Hazel, she said, the mock sweetness in her voice like a razor's edge. What brings you here? I didn't expect to see you tonight. I swallowed hard, my pulse quickening, but I didn't back down. I met her eyes, refusing to let her intimidate me. I think it's time we finally talk. Her smile faltered just for a second, but she quickly recovered. Talk about what? You've made it clear that this house is yours now, I said. My voice steady despite the flutter of nerves in my stomach. That my place here doesn't matter anymore. But I'm done letting you control everything. I want my life back, Ivy. Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't step back. Your life back? She repeated with a small, amused laugh. It's cute that you think you still have a place here, but that's not how it works, sweetie. I clenched my fists at my sides, fighting the urge to scream. To throw all of my frustration at her. You've taken everything from me, I said, my voice cracking, but I didn't stop. This house. My family. My father. You've made it so that nothing feels real anymore. I'm not going to let you keep doing this. For the first time, I saw something flicker in her eyes. It wasn't sympathy, it wasn't regret, it was something darker. A hint of something defensive. But she didn't show it outwardly. Instead, she stepped back, almost inviting me in, like she was giving me space to make my point. I'm sorry if you think I've taken something from you, she said, her tone still smooth. But now there was a cold edge to it. But I'm not going anywhere. And if you think you can just walk back into this house and take it from me. I'm not here to take anything from you, I interrupted, my breath catching in my chest. I'm here to reclaim what's mine. To remind you that you haven't erased me. Her face softened into something that almost resembled pity. But there was no kindness behind it. You really think you can do that? She asked, stepping closer, her voice quieter, as if we were sharing some kind of secret. You're still here, but you're not wanted. This house can't hold two regrets, Hazel. I flinched at her words, but I didn't let her see it. Instead, I stepped forward, closing the gap between us, my eyes locking onto hers. You may have my father, you may have his house, but you'll never have me. You'll never make me feel like I don't matter. I'm not going anywhere. Her smile faded, and for the first time, she looked unsure. It was a crack, a small one, but it was enough. I could feel the air shift, the tension tightening in the room. For all her words, her power, she wasn't as untouchable as she had once seemed. She wasn't the one who controlled everything anymore. I'm done being the shadow you cast, I said, my voice steady now. The anger replaced with something quieter but stronger. And I'm done being afraid. I turned to leave then, but as I reached the door, I heard her voice behind me, softer now. Almost regretful. Do you really think you can change things? I stopped, hand on the doorknob, but I didn't look back. I'm not trying to change you, Ivy. I'm changing me. I stepped outside, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the weight of the house, and everything it represented, lift from my shoulders. The door clicked shut behind me, and I realized I wasn't walking away from a house or a person. I was walking away from the version of myself I had been forced to become. And this time, I wasn't looking back. The next few days passed in a kind of haze. The remnants of my confrontation still simmering under the surface of my thoughts. I had walked away from the house. But I couldn't quite shake the feeling that I was still carrying something with me, something unresolved. The confrontation with her had given me a moment of clarity. But it hadn't been enough to release the last vestiges of what I had left behind. It wasn't just about the house anymore, it was about reclaiming myself. Finding a way to move forward in a life that had been fractured by too many years of silence and resentment. But the more I tried to put distance between myself and the past, the more her shadow followed me. It was impossible to ignore her, to forget how she had wormed her way into every crevice of my life. Even now, I could hear her voice in my head, cool and dismissive, reminding me that I was nothing but an intruder in my own home. One evening, after work, I found myself walking past the park near my old house, my feet taking me in the direction I'd hoped to avoid. I didn't know why I was doing this, why I felt the pull to go back. Even just to see the place from a distance. I told myself I was just passing by, but as I rounded the corner, I saw it, the house. Standing like it always had, a towering reminder of everything I had once known. I froze. My heart pounded in my chest. It was as though the house had reached out and grabbed me by the collar, pulling me back in. Back into its suffocating embrace. I hadn't come here to confront her again, but standing on the sidewalk, staring at the windows I had once looked out of, I realized something. I wasn't done. I wasn't done with her. And I wasn't done with the house. For the first time, I felt like I had to face everything head on. Not to reclaim what had been taken from me, but to finally break free from its hold on me. I had let the past define me for far too long. But tonight, that was going to change. I walked up the familiar path, my heart racing, but not with fear. With something else. Something stronger. As I reached the front door, I hesitated for a second. But only for a second. Then I knocked. I wasn't sure what I expected. She had to be the one to answer, didn't she? She was always the one who answered. She was always the one who greeted people, who smiled and played the part. But when the door opened, it wasn't her who stood there. It was my father. He looked at me with something unreadable in his eyes, as if he didn't quite know what to say. I didn't know what to say either. But I was here, and I wasn't going to turn away this time. Hazel, he started, his voice uncertain. As if trying to gauge whether I had come to start another confrontation or simply to speak. I need to talk to you, I said, cutting him off before he could say anything else. There was no time for pleasantries. No time for anything but getting this over with. He stepped aside and gestured for me to come in. The warmth of the house enveloping me once again, but this time, I didn't feel like I was being suffocated by it. This time, it was different. I wasn't walking in as the girl who didn't belong. The girl who had been pushed to the sidelines. I was walking in as someone who had found their footing. Someone who had finally realized they didn't need anyone else to make them whole. We sat down in the living room, the same room where she had once looked at me with that quiet contempt, where I had sat in silence, too afraid to speak. Tonight, though, it was different. There were no unspoken accusations, no hidden agendas. It was just me and my father, finally facing each other. I'm not angry anymore, I said quietly, looking at him for the first time in years. Really looking at him. I've been angry for a long time, but I'm not now. And I don't need you to fix everything, to make it better. I just need you to understand something. He nodded, his eyes never leaving mine. As though finally realizing that I wasn't going to disappear into the background anymore. I know I haven't been what you needed me to be. I haven't been there for you the way I should have been. But I thought I was doing what was best. I shook my head, a small laugh escaping me, though there was no humor in it. What was best? Keeping everything hidden? Keeping me locked away in the shadows? He looked down, guilt flashing across his face, but there was something else there. Something that hadn't been there before, understanding. Finally, after all these years, he was seeing me. Seeing what had been taken, seeing what had been wrong. I was wrong, he said, his voice breaking, as if admitting it for the first time. I should have fought for you. I should have fought for us. I swallowed hard, the knot in my throat tightening. It's too late for that now, I said softly. But I'm done waiting for you to make it right. I've spent too long waiting for something that will never happen. I've spent too long being angry, being bitter. And I'm done. I'm done being that person. He didn't speak for a long time, just sat there, the weight of what I had said sinking in. Finally, he nodded, a sad smile touching his lips. I'm proud of you, Hazel. I always have been, even when I didn't show it. For the first time in a long time, I felt something close to peace. It wasn't forgiveness, not exactly. But it was understanding. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. I stood up, turning toward the door. I'm going to leave now, I said, my voice steady. But I just wanted you to know that I'm not coming back. Not to the house. Not to this life. He stood as well, his eyes meeting mine, and for a moment, I saw something in them that I hadn't seen in years, regret, yes, but also a kind of acceptance. And I realized, in that moment, that I didn't need him to fix it. I didn't need him to apologize. I had already let go. As I walked out the door, I felt lighter. I wasn't walking away from the house or my father. I was walking away from the past. The shadow had finally lifted. And this time, I was free to live my own life. I didn't know what came over me after I left my father's house. But a sense of finality hung in the air. A quiet understanding that things were never going to be the same again. I had walked away from more than just the house. I had walked away from the version of myself that had been caught in the crossfire of lies and manipulation. I had walked away from the person I was when I was drowning in someone else's shadow. The world felt different now, lighter somehow. As though, for the first time in years, I was breathing air that wasn't polluted by the ghosts of the past. It wasn't easy, but each step away from that house was a step closer to something better. Something I had nearly forgotten was possible. I moved into a new place a week later. It was small, cozy, but most importantly, it was mine. No one else had ever lived there. It wasn't tainted by memories, by other people's choices, by that suffocating presence. I could start fresh, begin rebuilding the parts of me that had been neglected for so long. At first, the silence was overwhelming. It wasn't the kind of silence that enveloped me like it had in my old house. Oppressive and heavy. No, this was a peaceful silence. The kind you don't realize you're craving until it surrounds you. I found myself savoring the quiet moments, listening to music without interruption. Cooking a meal without anyone walking into the kitchen. Leaving notes that no one would read except me. I was alone, but for the first time, I wasn't lonely. It took time to heal, to come to terms with everything that had happened. But each day, each new morning that I woke up in my own space, brought me closer to understanding what I had lost, and what I had gained. And slowly, piece by piece, I started to feel like myself again. There were days when I still felt the sting of her words, still heard the echo of her voice, telling me I didn't belong. Those were the hardest days. The days when the bitterness crept back in, threatening to swallow me whole. But then I would remind myself, I had been living with the weight of her judgment for too long. I had been letting her decide who I was, and I couldn't do that anymore. I started doing the things I used to love. I took walks in the park, went to the small coffee shop on the corner, and even signed up for art classes I had always wanted to try. Slowly, I reconnected with pieces of myself that I had buried, that I had forgotten in the chaos of the years before. Each small victory, whether it was completing a painting or simply sitting in silence without that constant feeling of dread, felt like reclaiming a part of my soul. But then one evening, a familiar name appeared on my phone, my father. I had expected the call eventually, but when it came, I wasn't ready. I stared at the screen for a long moment, unsure of what to do. I had moved on. I had taken back control of my life, and I didn't want to go back to the hurt, to the years of neglect. But I knew I couldn't avoid him forever. I answered the call. Hazel, his voice was soft, cautious, as if testing the waters. I know we haven't talked much since everything happened, but I've been thinking. I'm not asking for anything. I wanted to say I'm sorry. His words felt like they were wrapped in something heavy. Guilt? Regret? I couldn't tell. But there was a truth in them, a sincerity I hadn't expected. The words weren't for me, they were for himself. For the things he hadn't been able to fix. And in that moment, I realized that his apology wasn't the answer I needed. It wasn't going to undo the past, and it wasn't going to make the pain go away. But it was a step. A small one, but a step nonetheless. I appreciate it, I said, my voice steady, though it felt like there was a lump in my throat. But I can't go back to what we had. I can't go back to the house, to how things were. I've made peace with that. There was silence on the other end. It wasn't uncomfortable, just a pause. A moment where we both realized that what we had once known was gone. I understand, he said quietly. I just wanted you to know that I'm proud of you. I always was, even when I wasn't there. The words stung, but they didn't break me. I nodded, even though he couldn't see it. Thank you, Dad, but it's time for both of us to move forward. In our own ways. We said goodbye, and as I hung up the phone, I realized something important. I had always thought that forgiveness was about fixing things. About going back and making things right. But now I understood, forgiveness wasn't for him. It wasn't for her. It was for me, for my own peace. It was about letting go of the past and allowing myself to move forward without the chains of regret holding me back. The rest of the evening was quiet, but not in the way it had been before. This time, it was the kind of quiet that comes with knowing you've made peace. That comes with finally allowing yourself to be free. And as I closed my eyes that night, the last thought in my mind wasn't about what I had lost. It was about what I had gained. The freedom to live my life on my terms. The strength to keep moving forward, no matter what. For the first time, I felt like I was truly in control. And nothing could take that away from me. The weeks drifted by, and with each passing day, I felt more and more like myself again. The weight that had once threatened to crush me had slowly been lifted, piece by piece. Until all that was left was the quiet strength I had forgotten I possessed. The house, once a symbol of everything I had lost, no longer had a hold on me. And neither did her. I started finding small joys in life, things I hadn't even known I'd missed. I woke up each morning without the constant ache of anxiety and bitterness. I had my own space, my own time, and I began filling it with things that made me happy. Things that belonged only to me. The apartment, once unfamiliar, now felt like home. The soft hum of the city outside my window was a reminder that I was finally moving in the direction I wanted to go. I was finally living for myself. I spent afternoons wandering through art galleries, lost in the colors and brushstrokes that once seemed so far out of reach. I took up running again, the sound of my feet on the pavement reminding me that I was capable of more than I had ever given myself credit for. I made friends, real friends, the kind who saw me for who I was and not for what I had been forced to become. But even as I built a new life, the past still lingered at the edges. It wasn't something I could completely escape, no matter how hard I tried. She remained a ghost in the corners of my mind, an echo of the words she had spoken. A shadow that stretched over everything. One evening, after a long day of running errands, I found myself standing in front of the cafe where I had met my father months before. I hadn't gone back there since. But today, something was different. Maybe it was the sense of closure that had settled in my bones. Maybe it was because I had spent so long avoiding the inevitable. But today, I walked in. The bell above the door jingled softly as I entered. The familiar smell of coffee beans and warm pastries hit me, and for a moment, I was back in time, back to when I had first walked through these doors. Uncertain of where I was going, unsure of how to move forward. But now, as I stood there, it was different. I was no longer a person trapped by the past. I was here because I could be. Because I wanted to be. I ordered a cup of coffee and found a seat by the window. I took a slow sip, letting the warmth spread through me. I had never been one for nostalgia, but something about this moment, this quiet, peaceful moment, felt right. Then, as if the universe had planned it, I saw him. My father, sitting at a table across the room. He looked the same, older, more worn, but there was a softness to his features now. As though he had finally accepted what had happened between us. For a moment, I considered turning away, slipping out the door and avoiding this encounter. But something inside me told me to stay. To finally face him, face the past, face everything that had been broken. I took a deep breath and walked over to his table. He looked up in surprise, but there was no panic, no discomfort in his eyes. Just the same quiet understanding I had seen that night in the living room. And again on the phone. He gestured to the chair across from him. Hazel, he said, his voice soft but filled with something else. Something almost apologetic. I sat down, the weight of everything that had been unsaid hanging between us. There were no words at first. No angry outbursts, no accusations. Just two people who had spent too many years in silence. Trying to hold on to something that had long since slipped away. How are you? He asked finally, his voice tentative, as though testing the waters. I smiled, and it wasn't forced. It wasn't the kind of smile I had worn when I was trying to hide my pain, my frustration. It was genuine. The first time in so long that I had felt truly at ease. I'm doing well, I said, meeting his eyes. I'm doing better than I've been in years. There was a moment of silence, and for once, it wasn't uncomfortable. It was just two people sitting together, acknowledging the past without needing to fix it. I'm glad, he said. I've been thinking about you a lot, Hazel. I wish I could have done more. I wish I could have been there. Dad, I said, cutting him off, but gently, you don't have to say that. I've forgiven you. I've let go of everything. And I'm finally at peace with all of it. He nodded, the faintest hint of tears in his eyes. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm so proud of you. You've become someone I never thought I could help make. You've become stronger than I ever was. The weight of his words hit me harder than I expected. Not because they were an apology, but because they were an acknowledgement of everything I had gone through. Of the way I had fought to survive, to rebuild. Despite the things that had tried to hold me back. I didn't do it for you, Dad, I said quietly, almost to myself. I did it for me. He smiled, and it was a genuine smile this time, no sadness, no regret. Just acceptance. I know, he said, his voice steady. And I'm glad. Because you deserve to be happy, Hazel. You always have. And in that moment, I realized that I didn't need anything from him. I didn't need an apology, or an explanation. I had already found what I needed. I had found the strength to move on, to reclaim my life, to forgive myself. It wasn't easy. It had never been easy. But as I sat there, sharing coffee with the man who had once been the center of my world, I knew that I was no longer bound by the past. I had let go, and that had been the hardest yet most freeing thing I had ever done. The door of the cafe swung open, and for a second, the light from the outside world poured in. I glanced out the window and I realized that I was finally free. Not from the house, not from her. Not even from the past, but free from the chains I had placed on myself. And that, for the first time in my life, felt like home.